Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you today.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Good, and I'm looking for something positive, and we have a little bit of positive stuff.
A little bit positive,
There's
yeah.
A few people getting frustrated.
Yeah.
We got frustrated rather early. You know, I, of course, was frustrated with the coming bust in the stock market and the financial, which is still the big issue.
Yeah.
But then on top of it has been this virus came, and that interfered and made it worse. But then we had the reaction to the virus, and that was a calamity, and that's why the whole country is on stand-down, the economy is collapsing, and
Yeah.
you can't shop, and neighbors are squealing on neighbors. But still, there's a little bit of light out there, and it's coming from Idaho today, but there are others who are talking the same way. There's several governors out there. There are 8 states that never even put on sanctions, but Idaho, it has a group of people right now, standing up to the sanctions and saying that it is no benefit, and I quite frankly think they're on the side of the Constitution. No assembly, and what crime did they commit? But the one thing is that people capitulate to is they say, well, you got to give a little. It's back, you got to give up your freedoms to be protected, and this is something people can't protect on their own. So there we have to give into the people to have some authority to help us. But the whole thing is, they haven't yet showed us any proof that quarantines, massive quarantines like this, can be any better than a little voluntary good sense and quarantine ourselves or families and friends, and this whole thing that you close down a whole country. And then you have so much destruction of wealth. I thought one person made a pretty good point the other day. He had cancer, and he said this reaction to coronavirus has been very dangerous to him. He can't get his cancer treatment.
Jeez.
Nobody's sick anymore except if you have the virus. And if you have something, you better watch out. You're probably going to be said you had the virus, because everything has to be blamed on the virus. And it's hard for me to understand the motivation of people that fall into this trap. But I do understand how fear can be built, and when people become really scared, I see and meet people like that now. They're really, really frightened. People are motivated, to give in a little easier than they should, or a lot easier. But it's good to know there's a group out in Idaho right now thinking enough is enough. Let's go back to work. But I hear that more and more, and I'm sure you probably have heard this too, that people are saying, it's time they relieve us of some of this, and they maybe are realizing it's not working, or they may have realized they were a little frightened about speaking out against this because it was so overwhelming. If you didn't support everything Fauci was telling us what to do, and now he's losing credibility. Some of the statistics are changing now. So I think there is, a sign of moving in the direction, but we still have a ways to go, and we have to help keep up the momentum, moving in the direction of more freedom, not more thugs running our lives.
And it is terrifying how quickly Americans change to an absolutely panicked population. And I think a lot of it, I'm not a psychologist, but I think there's a lot of psychological aspects to this. The idea of putting on a mask, the idea there's an invisible enemy out there. You can't see it, but it will kill you if you get it. And of course, even taking the worst statistics that they would give, it's very, very unlikely you will die from it. It's 99.8 or 0.9%. But it has this effect of terrifying. You look in people's eyes; they don't want to meet your eye contact. But so it has a psychological impact. But the Bundys, Eamon Bundy down in Idaho, he's no stranger to fighting the federal government, as we know. But he's kind of leading a mini resistance to this governor that they have. Brad Little just gave an order: hey, you can't gather. That's it, full stop. So he's leading people. He's saying he'll help with legal defense for people that are willing to resist. He wants people to be able to go to church. If they want to. Heather Scott, who's a state rep, is pushing people to resist. She says we have a God-given, constitutionally protected right to assemble. And there are other places. Idaho is kind of a hotbed for freedom. And, of course, no surprise that you always did well there. Here's a letter from a sheriff. He wrote to the governor, and he said, said there are some important questions to ask about this. What's the reliability of the information disseminated by the World Health Organization? What about our response to that information? The cause and effect of devastation caused by our response, and our responsibility to change course. He's asking the governor to call up a full legislature and assemble them for a meeting. He says, you can't just suspend the Constitution on your own. We should have the legislatures in there. And if you could bring that up again, please. One of the things that he cited, which is pretty important, he said on Tuesday, Texas Governor Greg Abbott changed his state's course by signing an executive order giving churches back their right to assemble. I wouldn't word it exactly that right, because we've always had the right to assemble, but he's pointing out that other states, and the Texas one is a slight move in the right direction, but there are people like this. I think there are hundreds of people like the sheriff out there saying, no way, something is really wrong with this.
The point they always make is that you can't know what's best for your family. You can make a mistake, and something bad might happen. There's some truth to that. When we take care of our kids and our communities and assume responsibilities, no, there's never perfection there. But when we do that, if we look at it in a very narrow sense, that we do certain things to take care of ourselves, stay out of harm's way, not take too much risk, whether it's financial or physical, that's our responsibility. And sometimes things happen out of control, and sometimes they happen because that individual doesn't do a good job. But when you get a guy in office that's sort of like a dictator, that Fauci, who's dictating all this policy, when he makes a mistake, or somebody else in a similar position makes a mistake, the damage is so overwhelming. It is a challenge to the Constitution. This, there's so much of a challenge with 9/11 and the Patriot Act. But, if this stuff stands, this is much worse. And once they say you get the principle, well, maybe it'll get better a little bit, but what if there's a return of the virus, or maybe there's another virus, or maybe there's another episode? So therefore, we know what to do. Lockdown, go to your houses, and just because you're unhappy and people get psychologically sick and some people commit suicide, we'll deal with that later. But the thing that I see is the most dangerous is when governments make the mistakes. It involves a lot of people plus our liberties. When you and I make a mistake, we have to be responsible for it, and we have to do our very best to take care of ourselves and our family. But that is a much safer way. And matter of fact, if you compare the two possibilities, the individual protection of their own freedoms and taking care of themselves and making themselves safe is so far superior than to a government, making us safe and secure. And I think people are waking up to this, but once again, fear overrides a lot of reason when they say, you're right, but, I'm scared to death about what might happen.
Yeah. And, they've put all their faith in Fauci and Anthony Fauci. He's going to save us. He's the guy. He's got a lot of conflicts of interest. He's tied to the hip to Bill Gates. And a lot of people are pretty concerned about someone like Bill Gates who wants to, do all sorts of things. It's not clean. And both he and Neil Ferguson, their early models were so widely off. And they're completely off. And even recently, Fauci said, well, 100 to 200,000 people will die if you do what I say. Otherwise, it'll be 2 million. The numbers aren't going anywhere in that direction. But here's one thing about Idaho, just to go back there for a second. All this shutdown, this is why people are resisting. All this shutdown, the whole state, no business happening. 13 people in total have died yet. And that is a tragedy. That's terrible. But how many people died elsewhere? Look at somewhere like Texas. We have not as bad as some of these places, but we still have a lot of shutdown, a lot of panic. We've had 151 coronavirus deaths. That's pretty bad. That's unfortunate. But you know what we get in a year? You've talked about this before. On our highways, 3,800 people die each year on the highways. We don't shut the country down for that. So it just shows you that there's something else at play here. But one of the things you mentioned it the other day, and it's worth bringing up again, is the issue of Sweden. And I think we even have a graphic on that. But Sweden has done something very different. They've taken some measures. They've banned big gatherings of more than 50 people, and I think they put colleges online. But they did not get people from going restaurants. They did not tell you to shut down your business. They did none of this stuff. People basically living their normal lives. And if the numbers here hold, which it looks like they are, if you look at the patterns of other countries that have defeated it, it looks like they will have gone through this whole pattern, pretty much the same, if not even a little bit better shape than other countries that have done complete and total lockdowns. You know, there are a lot of really respected epidemiologists and other scientists out there that are saying flattening the curve, which was the mantra, you know, remember a few weeks ago, flattening the curve doesn't save one life. All it does is it spreads that out over a longer period. And it prolongs the shutdown, destroying the economy. You know, they say alcohol sales are way up. People are probably, you know, having all kinds of problems with that. And one other final thing on this, Dr. Paul, Fauci himself said that our entire numbers for the country are based on what's happening in New York. But we've got a great tweet. This guy is great. He's a numbers guy, and he's been looking really closely. He's from New York, at what's been happening in New York. And he says that the numbers in New York are so far off. If we have that tweet, we can put it up. Yossi Gestner, and he's following that very closely. Anybody home? The model that is shaping U.S. policy on coronavirus had expected that New York will need 10,839 ICU beds today. The actual use is under 3,400. This is off the doomsday side by 310%, despite weeks of real data. So they keep adjusting it down, and even as they adjust it down, it's way, way, way off. Now that's good news because you don't need as many hospital beds, but the terror that caused everyone to shut up and don't question it, what are the implications of that?
Boy, that's for sure. You know, we know that Bill Gates is not a friend of liberty, and he would put marks on our foreheads or wherever if we take the vaccine. And one thing we can agree on is Bill Gates isn't in need of money. He's passing out the money. The CDC runs the CDC, and so that's very biased. But there is a lot of money involved in corporate medicine, and that's what we have. We don't have free market medicine, corporate medicine. We have a lot of people selling vaccines. They like vaccines, and they will promote them, and yet. In medicine, with total monopoly of allopathic medicine, we in medical school aren't taught very much about some of the natural cures that are available. And it took me a long time to realize that you can do with a lot less medications and even vaccines, but you don't have to give up the principle of vaccines. You just don't need to give babies a cocktail of vaccines, and yet people can actually get put in jail for not giving their kids vaccines. You know, this is horrible. But I think one thing, even recently, I've reemphasized, you know, looking at everything on nutrition. And Bill Sardi, that writes all daily on Lou Rockwell's side, I mean, he really has an understanding of this, and that's just looking at your diet a little bit. And one of the cheapest things you can get, vitamin D, which is anti-cancer and anti-infection, is the sunlight. But they're never told that you can get a lot of prevention by just changing eating and working and exercise activities. But instead, get another shot, get another vaccine. Everybody's just on pins and needles till they get another vaccine. By the time they get that vaccine out, this phase will probably be over. It'll probably be on the downswing or almost gone by that time. But they'll still work very hard on it. And I'm not opposed to vaccines per se and totally, but I think that when you have a dictate by a government and says everybody's going to get vaccinated, it reminds me of 1976. Everybody got vaccinated. It was the first week I was in Congress, and more people died from the vaccination. The vaccine was the wrong vaccine, but they did it in a hurry. And you think they're in a hurry now? They're going to make mistakes. And it's not just by a mistake for one individual. The mistake will be made for all of the millions of people who will have to do it. This lockdown is a mistake. It's dangerous. It's harmful. But the biggest mistake is intrudes in our individual personal rights and our Constitution. That is hard to reverse because that is epidemic, because we've been fighting that for a long time. In the last 100 years, there's been a steady erosion of assuming responsibility for ourselves. And this is another time and another big hit, and it's going to probably and possibly could be, bigger than what followed 9/11.
Yeah, and this is why it's so insane. You mentioned sunlight and how building that vitamin D is so important. We have a final little clip here that we would put up because this shows how insane these totalitarians are who are running their little kingdoms. If we have that last one. Here's a guy, he went out to play with his 6-year-old daughter in an empty park. They were playing baseball in New York in an empty field, he and his daughter. And what happened? His name was Matt Mooney, 33-year-old guy, 6-year-old daughter. The police came and arrested him. He was arrested for violating the state's social distancing guidelines. He was standing there with his daughter playing baseball. Here's what he said in the news. And it terrified his daughter. Okay, can you imagine a little girl? She's like, Daddy, I don't want you to get arrested. At this point, I'm thinking, there's no way they're going to arrest me. This is insane. I'm telling her, don't worry. Daddy's not going to get arrested. I've done nothing wrong. Don't worry about it. And then they arrest me. They arrest the guy for getting a little bit of sunlight, helping his psychological help, his poor daughter, and this.
Did you see there's somebody out on doing some boating?
Yeah.
And then somebody was on like a surfboard or something. He got too close to the boat, and the police came and got him. I don't know whether he got arrested.
He was arrested, yeah.
He arrested. He got too close. Separation is required on lakes and ponds and oceans and everything else. And yet at the same time, the forced putting people on military operations. Oh, there's exceptions for this. We still have to do our military operations. We have to send our ships around the world, and they don't follow all the same rules either. And then if they get sick and raise Cain, then they get into big trouble and saying, "Hey, we're on unsafe conditions." Couple different rules for different people.
That's true. The thing is, this has a real effect on people, and I'm sure you know people that have been out of work. I do. A good friend of mine, he's had a family print shop for 46 years. He said, we're going to have to close our doors at the end of the month. We just have had no orders. Everything is shut down. A friend of ours that runs a trucking company, he spent months and months getting this contract, a big contract, and he's got all of his drivers, license and everything, and then they just shut it down. The governor said, no, you can't do any of this. So it's a real effect. And the scary effect really is also how some of the private companies are mimicking the state. Our little H-E-B over here is a nice store. I've always shopped there. I go there now. The same young people who were smiling and bagging my groceries 3 weeks ago are scowling at me and barking at me. You have to line up to get in. They won't let you in. You get in, the store is empty. There's no reason for it. There's a cop standing there. It's really terrifying how this happens to people who are your neighbors,
So the cure is the real problem right now. We have way too much cure that doesn't work. This pretense. But it's based on authoritarianism, that government knows what's best and individuals are incapable of taking care of it. But it really boils down to this whole concept of who's responsible for protecting against risk. Yeah. And obviously in a free society, the individual is. But if governments get to the point where they might want to protect you from your neighbor being sick and giving you a virus, that's one thing. But then the step that they always go to, and very much involved already, is they're going to protect you against yourself with your personal habits.
Yeah.
And then there's not much left. And if they can take it to the point now where, boom, there's, in Idaho, 3 deaths in Idaho, and somebody wants to come along and say, oh, well, no church this week, close it up, and the one we talked about, vitamin D and sunlight, that one place where they went out and the edict was exercise, but no sunbathing. That's how absurd the whole thing is, just to get in the act of telling other people what to do. It's a major hurdle for most people, I guess, throughout history, is assuming that you might know as much as the government knows, and that you should do it in your best interest. It works very well when it's permitted and people respond to it. If all of a sudden tomorrow we could wipe all this nonsense away and just removed all the penalties too, because we've ruined the economy. Now we're ruining people's health and we're ruining their liberty. But if we return their liberties, and I've said this so many times, if we return liberty in the midst of one of these crashing corrections and that nobody gets bailed out, but just give them their freedom to go to work, take care of yourself, keep what you earn, quit paying income tax, because we wouldn't have an income tax, that people would do it because that's the only way they could live. They'd have to go back to work, and it would immediately correct itself on a much shorter period of time. Now, just think of reversing everything that's happened since the attack on civil liberties, since Woodrow Wilson and Roosevelt, and every time we have a war, we lose more civil liberties. So it's going to be a tough reversal, and it may be what they're hinting at in Idaho. Maybe you have to do a little rebellion here and there in order to shake them up and say, look, you're wrong. We're on the side of the Constitution, and you're not. So give us a break.
Yeah, and there is also the legal aspects. There are some class action suits being filed against this attack on religion. That's very encouraging too. But I'll just finish by saying, the main claim about this is that we have to shut everything down because this virus kills at a much higher rate than the seasonal flu. Well, that may have been the case, what they thought earlier, but as we see more and more, they're cooking the books. It doesn't have a scientific justification for that. And for the simple reason is that they are making a faulty equation where the deaths from the disease are over the denominator of those that have been diagnosed with the disease. But because we're not doing random samples of who may have that virus, the denominator is totally false. So you can't have, like any math person in basic 6th grade level knows, you can't have an improper denominator and expect to get a proper equation. And that's why, of course, Dr. Paul, as you know, every year for the seasonal flu, they make an estimate of how many people have gotten that virus who may not have been sick, who didn't go to the doctor because they weren't that sick. Until you have that kind of thing, you don't know that it's more deadly than the flu. And in fact, it's going way, way, way down from what they originally said. So everyone is afraid, everyone is concerned, everyone is nervous. That doesn't mean you have to listen to government bureaucrats who generally don't know much more than the rest of us. There are a lot of good, very intelligent scientists out there who are challenging the idea that you have to be huddled in your house rather than going out. Maybe, Dr. Paul, getting herd immunity, which is what we always do for seasonal flu. Once a certain number of people get it, then the virus itself becomes defeated. So anyway, we've gotten a lot of messages, emails, comments from people, and we're grateful. They're very positive. They're saying thank you for giving us at least a little bit of counter information. Of course, everyone has to take precautions as they see fit, and that's Dr. Paul's main point. But they don't want a government coming in with a gun and arresting you for playing baseball with your daughter. So keep in touch. Go to ronpaulinstitute.org. There's a link in the description. Sign up for our updates. We'll keep in touch because we never know what happens, but we'll keep in touch directly. And thank you again for watching us as we continue to watch this tragedy unfold.
If the media had practiced a little bit of a different way of reporting this, and every time they put up that so-and-so state had 250 deaths last night or something, if they would only at the same time put up the deaths from pneumonia, the deaths from flu, the deaths from highway, a little bit of comparison, say, hey, this isn't too bad. But no, they actually go in the other direction. Daniel, I think even yesterday, mentioned the fact that there was an incident where the hospital was instructed, even if the person didn't die from coronavirus, they were to put down that he had coronavirus and put it on that statistic. And that is really evil if that has occurred very often. But there's something about the reporting. You don't hear anything about what's happening. And there's other causes of death. But in perspective, they look at this, just building the fear. The fear factor is what they do in breaking through it when it's incessant. But there's a few stations now on TV, even on regular TV, are starting to challenge the numbers. And it's a little late, but it's still good. And the more the merrier. So let's wait and see. Truth wins out in the end, and that's what we want. We only want to reveal the truth, that people have overreacted, they're hysterical, and the treatment has been much worse than the disease. And the biggest challenge we have is to make sure that people know that we really care about the people who are dying, but we don't want to make it worse. We don't want to cause people to die from other things and kill our whole way of life and our whole Constitution, and that's what's up for grabs. But I am keeping my fingers crossed. I am hopeful that more people will wake up, because the problem won't be solved without that. And I keep thinking in terms of foreign policy. It was back in the 60s when the people finally woke up and said, the killing is too much. We're sick and tired of Vietnam. We're not going to fund it, and told Congress so, what they had to do, and they defunded. But now it's not quite the same, but in a way, the people have to speak up. If you're sick and tired of sitting at home, if you get a little bit of confidence that probably the end of the world won't come if you can talk to your neighbors again and actually go to church, I don't think the world will come to an end. I think our country and our Constitution will come to an end if we don't break this cycle. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.